Welcome to Films and Stuff with your hosts, Pete Mitchell and Ethan Hunt.
Pete, Films and Stuff, new day, new episode. How are you doing?
I'm good. Ethan, how are you?
Everything is great. Today, we are talking about Andor again.
Yes, that's right. So normally, I think we would watch, say 3 episodes based on the current pattern.
Yep.
But I think enough has happened in episodes 7 and 8 to justify a slightly earlier than normal review / recap, and maybe sets us up to also guess as to what happens in the coming episodes.
I agree. You know, one of the things that I've noticed about this show is that, you use the phrase slow burn a lot, and I think that really explains how you should be watching Andor. If you're watching Andor just as an episode by episode basis to be entertained, it's easy to walk away after a single episode and say, nah, nothing really happened.
This is not going to be for you.
Yeah, this is a kind of like a space drama. Nothing's really happening. For me, the fascination with this, and I sincerely mean that I'm just fascinated by this show, is the mundaneness. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. Mundacity?
The details are so interesting to me. Let me give you an example. Obviously, there's spoiler alerts. In episode 8, we see, not to get ahead of ourselves, but we see Cassian in prison, right? Space prison. And it's basically a factory. And he's making, we don't know what. But for me, this is so interesting that everything that I've seen, I was thinking like, I wonder if these are like the feet for an AT-AT that I've seen in The Empire Strikes Back. And I'm like, this is so cool. Like, you're wondering, watching, Return of the Jedi, watching A New Hope, watching Empire Strikes Back, where they got all these things from, right? Like, did they have robots like welding them? Did they just have like this 3D printer? And now you can kind of see the backstory, the details of how a lot of like Imperial machinery was made, right? It was not slave labor. It was prison labor, criminal labor.
Yeah. I mean, you're being polite, but yes, it is slave labor, right?
Yeah. So now we can break down episode 7 and episode 8, but I just wanted to kind of say that to get it off my chest, because I think that's really the value of Andor, which is these little details, which is totally outside, the plot of each episode. But for me, that was just one of the things that struck me that was like so interesting. And it's one of the nuggets that I love watching Andor for, is to get more context about what is the Empire like? What is the galaxy like? How are things getting done in this world?
I think that if you're watching this show, you have to have the right frame of mind to do it.
True.
If you're expecting this to be a Fast and the Furious style, high octane, high energy TV show, you're watching the wrong show.
Yeah.
There are other shows that are good for that. Mm-hmm. This isn't it. In terms of mentality, in terms of pace, this is the Better Call Saul or the Breaking Bad of the Star Wars universe.
Absolutely true.
This is
such a good analogy. Absolutely true.
This is the one where you're watching 60-minute episodes of Cassian in a jail cell go through his regular day-to-day daily activity, where you're actually seeing the nuts and bolts, quite literally, of the Empire. For Star Wars fans who are deep into the lore, like Ethan is, it's really valuable because it gives you great insight that we will never get from a movie. Because the movies don't have time. The movies are more high octane. They will never sit and show you how an AT-AT is made or how a speeder is made or anything like that.
Yes.
They'll never show that. In fact, if anything, what they would do in the movie, if this were in the movie, somehow they would have like a prison break, or they would have like a breakout from an outside help. It would never show you the most boring, mundane things ever. And that's what the show is very good for. And I fully respect that could be a point of contention for your casual Star Wars viewer who's only used to seeing Star Wars based on the movies. Because if you only watch the movies and you like the movies, but that's it, this show is going to be a massive turnoff for you. Even Obi-Wan, it had its issues, but was much more high octane than this. You saw fight scenes, you saw him get back into it, and of course it starred Obi-Wan, right? So Ewan McGregor everyone loves, and B, it's a beloved character. Cassian Andor, we've seen him on screen for 90 minutes in one prequel that even though I loved Rogue One, most people are like, well, we didn't need that movie.
Do you think we should do a round of applause for Disney because what they've really done, and Lucasfilms, because what they've really done is they've showed us The Mandalorian, which had some action, and they introduced Baby Yoda, which was really the star. Then we came back with Boba Fett, right? Which was even slower, but they brought back The Mandalorian and Baby Yoda to kind of keep it going. Then they came back with Obi-Wan, which you mentioned is even slower, but they had a very young Princess Leia to kind of keep it moving. And now they've slowed it down even further with Andor. And it's almost like they've, like the Fast and the Furious does it the opposite. Like the Fast and the Furious treats us like
faster and more crazy.
We're cocaine addicts, and we need a higher and higher dose of adrenaline to achieve the same. Whereas Lucasfilms is saying the opposite, saying, hey, you've already accomplished this baseline of your heartbeat. Let's slow it down even more. Slow it down even more. And now they've gotten us to Andor, which I agree, for the rank and file Star Wars follower, is going to be like really dull. For me and for you, and I think for others, it's fascinating to get into the nuts and bolts of like, this is how you run a government, right? The Empire is, for the lack of a better word, a government. This is how you run it. This is how you deal with prisoners. This is how you manufacture stuff. This is how the Senate works.
This is
right?
how the power plays work
within
an office
system.
Organization. And within an organization,
yes.
like this is the kind of stuff that we have seen in offices before, right? People who are just like, I want more responsibility. I want less responsibility. I'm going to take my responsibility from somebody else. I'm going to increase the size of my power and my abilities in the office. We're seeing all of that. And that is not something that we would associate with what is effectively a sci-fi action series set in space.
I agree. To say it's a sci-fi action series and you see Karn at whatever, the Ministry of Weights and Measures, sitting in like 1970s, basic computer
like this
with
crazy
6 buttons.
pod. Yeah.
You're like, wait a second. Is this a sci-fi movie or this is a 1960s DARPA movie? And it's, I don't know. I'm thrilled with it. I have to say, even though it is a little bit slow, it's the details that are so fascinating to me. And I have to say, it's the political intrigue, right? Because if we turn now back to the story, we've got the rebels, which are really, we see the Empire essentially like stressing out, right? Corporate HQ is going nuts trying to track down these rebels. Little do they know, the rebels consist of an antiquities dealer who's kind of by himself and is worried that he's going to be identified, and he doesn't really have anyone who's on his side right now except for his shopkeeper, who I don't think is Princess Leia. We see Senator Mothma, who is struggling with banking regulations.
And a bad marriage.
Although I'm really not sure why your marriage is so bad. He doesn't seem like a miserable guy. And is really not aligned with what Luthen is doing. We've got Vel, And what's Vel's girlfriend's name?
Cinta,
who are also not entirely on the same page. Cinta is fully aligned with the rebellion,
Alliance.
which is nothing right now, right? Luthen goes to see our good friend Saw Gerrera,
yeah.
right? And those two are not aligned. They're absolutely not on the same page in terms of how to take on the Empire. And Cassian Andor is in prison, and the Empire doesn't even know it. They're looking for him, and he's in their own prison.
I think it's so cool what that scene with Saw Gerrera I found to be so cool, because the Rebel Alliance that we have known on screen has always been this one unified body.
Mm-hmm.
There was never any question that they weren't on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
And this show, at least the last episode, number 8, really highlighted that this is like the nascent stages of the Alliance.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody trusts each other.
Yeah.
They're struggling for finance, or they were until now.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, people didn't want to work with each other. They did not. Saw Gerrera doesn't want to work with this other guy who's also on the Alliance. So you have like these loose associations of rebels that aren't working with each other. And even within the ones who are working together, one is like really in it for the cause, the other's in it because she loves Cinta.
Yeah.
So it seems like such a amateur operation. And then you think about it, it's like, well, duh, it is an amateur operation.
It is.
It's run by 3 people, right? Or 4 people at most. And I really like that. I really am enjoying that. I expect that by the end of this season, what's going to happen is, the first thing that's going to happen is that Cassian Andor is going to get into the Rebel Alliance, as in like he's going to be all in. Because right now, Cassian Andor is like the big jerk. He's done the job for the rebels. He wants nothing more to do with them. He's tried to retire with his load of money off on this beach planet or resort planet where he gets
Namos
wrongfully arrested. And I imagine that this is going to be the turning point, or not this specifically, but by the end of this season, there's going to be a turning point where he's going to get in onto the Rebel Alliance.
Hold on. Can I just make you pause right there? He is in prison. In your opinion, is he going to A, escape prison, B, be broken out of prison?
I think he's going to be broken out. I think he's going to be broken out because right now, in prison, he poses a greater threat to Luthen and Cinta and Vel. Because their logic is going to be, hey, he's already in jail with them. If they figure out his name isn't Grief or whatever he was saying, and if they figure out that he's Cassian Andor, someone's going to put 2 and 2 together, and they can't risk that. So I think they're going to go through some way, somehow, they're going to break him out.
Can I tell you, in what we saw in episode 8, and again, this is so granular, do you remember when he was kind of being escorted down, and they went to kind of like this corridor checkpoint, and one of the guards was late? I thought, I was kind of like half expecting that the guy who was going to show up was going to be on his side, and
one of the rebels.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, when I didn't recognize the guy, but my mind instantly went to whoever this guy is going to be is going to be the guy who betrays them.
Exactly,
and he still could be. We don't really know.
Yeah.
But I think he's going to betray the Empire.
Yeah.
So I think that that's probably where we're going with it, is that by the end of episode 12, Cassian's all in, or at least more in on the Alliance. And I think something is going to happen because we know that this is 2 seasons. I think the end of season 1 is going to be a cliffhanger of some kind, which kind of forces all these disparate group of rebels to get together.
Are you sympathetic to Senator Mothma? Like, she seems to kind of be very much on the fence, as maybe you would expect a politician to be, right? She's enabled Luthen to kind of go forward with a plan. However, those two met, and whatever those two like had cooked up, it seemed like the only thing that she was doing was like, hey, I'll give you money and you be, my head of operations and you just get the rebels together, right? And then she kind of backed out and said, oh, what you're doing is too crazy. Even though I'm not getting you money, what you're doing is too crazy. I don't want any part of this anymore. But then she's still like,
I'm not getting that feeling. I'm not getting the feeling that she doesn't want to be a part of it. I think she just wants to do it her way, which is, she's obviously a very wealthy senator and she's somehow gotten her money stuck through whatever
the banking regulations.
They haven't been very clear about it. They just mentioned banking regulations, but she clearly has a lot of money, but she's not allowed to access it.
Yeah.
Which again doesn't make sense to me, but fine. That's okay. Maybe that's something they'll dig into a little later, especially with this banker guy.
But do you think she actually wants the rebellion, or do you think she just wants to kind of be like she said, like, I'm just trying to create a front, right? It's all an illusion. Is she just trying to be the little bee that stings the empire through her purported charity, and she just kind of wants to keep them like in check? Or do you really think she's like, hey, I want a bunch of X-Wing fighters and I want to bomb the Death Star?
No, I don't think she's there yet.
Luthen, that's what Luthen wants, right?
Oh yeah, Luthen is all in. Mm-hmm. I think he's the guy who's like, all right, I'm going to order the tactical nuclear missiles if I can.
Right.
At this stage, I think she's more let's say, the financing arm of the Rebel Alliance, and perhaps was the brain, but is no longer. I think Luthen has kind of taken over that with his operations. I imagine that something happens to her or her family that causes her to go all in. And because they've spent the last 7 or 8 episodes kind of putting her husband in the face as this jerk, I can't help but feel that he's going to bite the bullet. And that's going to be the event for Mon Mothma to say, that's it. I'm going all out against them. Here's the money. You've got your 80 million. I'm going to add my political and my money to it. Let's get all these X-Wings. Let's take the fight to them.
I think that's really interesting about her husband. It's going to go either one of two ways, right? He's either going to turn her in and force her to like flee and embrace the rebellion, or he's going to be like, oh, I thought you were this straight-laced, empire-loving senator. I've been doing all this stuff behind your back. Surprise! Our marriage is stronger than we both thought it was. We're on the same side supporting the rebels, right?
One of two things. Yeah. Either he's going to bite the bullet or their daughter is going to bite the bullet. I don't think she's going to get betrayed or called out because she's still, if I remember correctly, in episode 4 and 5, she's still a senator. They still refer to her as Senator Mon Mothma. I always remembered her as a senator. And we know
that's just a title, though, right? You call people forever, even when they're voted out of office, you still call them senator.
Maybe right? You could be right. But, I also think that George Lucas was very simplistic in his views on titles and positions. I just don't see it as her being caught and out of it. Like, look at Leia. Leia was a senator, and then when she's no longer, she's referred to as general.
Question number 1. Is Clea Leia?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so, because if that were the case, we would have met Jimmy Smits as well.
I agree with you. I mean, I know that there are some like internet circles that do believe that she is. I tend to agree with you that she's not. I think it's just too
You wouldn't have
bold.
The daughter of a senator and a senator herself working as a shopkeeper's assistant without any kind of security or anything.
I think that's the issue. The resemblance is obviously there. The name, of course, is kind of similar, right? But I think those are things that are intended just to kind of like give us some fodder to talk about. At the same time, it wouldn't be like a complete shock if it turned out that she was. But I agree with you. I don't think so. It's a little bit too bold in our face, right?
And not just that, it's also story-wise, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
She would do so much more good as a senator, or have more ability as a senator than someone who's literally just manning a ham radio in this antiquities dealer's basement.
Yeah, I agree. If it was more like she had a relationship with Luthen, and she also had kind of her second cover that she was posing as, like another dealer or something, then maybe it would have a little bit more credibility. But I agree, this seems to be a full-time job, and that doesn't seem to be like her thing.
What could be interesting is if she's a senator and she's got her own resistance group that's operating independently of Luthen, and they find out at the end of season 1, at the end of season 2, whatever it is.
I mean,
then that's how they join forces.
Well, it has to converge, right? Because somehow she and Mothma is, this is where your greatest fear is going to come into play. Your greatest fear is that there's a cocktail party, and Mothma says to her husband, "Hi, I'd like to introduce you to my apprentice. This is the young senator," right?
Leia Organa.
Yeah, Leia Organa from Alderaan or wherever.
That's right. I don't want to see that. I really don't. I don't mind a small
That's your
cameo.
greatest fear.
Yeah, I get the feeling like it would dilute a lot for Leia.
It would be better. And this would be, it's kind of like worthless and throwaway, but it'd be better if, you see Mothma and her husband comes up to her and says, "Oh, who is that you're just talking to?" "Oh, that was Senator Organa." "Oh, I didn't know that you two were close." "Yeah, actually, we're collaborating on some charitable initiatives." Something like that.
Yeah.
And you just see kind of the reference in passing, and kind of the back of her head and her cloak as she kind of walks across the room, right? That would be the more tasteful way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's half tongue in cheek, but it's also very respectful.
Yeah, because we do want to kind of see at least something as to how they know each other. But I agree. It seems to come, I would guess, the relationship is senator to senator and not through Luthen.
I just don't see it, only because if that were the case, these are all relatively new characters, so they wouldn't have. But let me ask you a question, because this is where I was leading towards anyway. Where do you see Luthen in the future?
Luthen's going to die.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I
thought too.
Luthen's going to die, just like every person who's kind of initiated a rebellion. He's got too many loose ends. Clea mentions to him, "Dude, you're starting to be too risky, button it up," basically. I think
and maybe it's his death that's the inciting incident, right? Because he's on friendly terms with all the rebels.
Well, he's Axis, right? Now people are looking, if we're going back to Karn and whoever the ISB lady is, who's now taking over things, they're all looking for Luthen. No one's looking for Andor. Karn is, but
Karn is.
The lady,
he suspects that Andor's got something to do with it. Karn isn't seeing the big picture. Karn is stuck seeing the small picture.
Well, they're not cluing him in.
Because he sees Andor as the guy that's basically ruined his life. Which is hilarious because he's kind of done it to himself. The Imperial officer lady, she's the one who's seeing the big picture, right? She's the one who's like, well, who gives a crap about this Cassian Andor? We want his boss.
I'm really disappointed though, because I had to, maybe it was too obvious and it was the purpose, but I really thought that she was going to find that Karn was her perfect deputy, and I thought she was going to be yes, you're the guy who's so dedicated and won't stop at anything. I need you on my team. I need loyal people that can support me. I'm going to get you out of here and you're going to work with me. And that seemed to be absolutely not. She's just just stick to your job.
But that's kind of exactly the Empire, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's out for themselves. They don't think to take on apprentices unless you're the Sith.
Her name's Deidre Miro.
That's right. So think to Rogue One, right? Mm-hmm. When we see Ben Mendelsohn's character and Grand Moff Tarkin, everyone's vying for credit. No one's really vying for the job.
Yeah.
They're more interested in being credited with the success than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So she wouldn't want to have anyone else on there. So I think that actually is quite appropriate that way. What I think is going to happen is I think that's going to be her downfall, is when she realizes he was actually onto something and he leaves. I think this more than anything is what, because I suspect what his next step is going to be, which is something we touched upon, is maybe he joins the Rebel Alliance as a double agent under his own accord.
I agree. I think Karn, at first I thought he was going to be redeemed and Mira was going to find him and he was going to be like, yes, someone now has taken me on and I can just like go scorched earth as I wanted to. Now I think not just a double agent, but I think he may be upset enough at the Empire. He's like, because he said it when she was leaving, I was good. I did everything right. Yes, I was too ambitious, but I did it for the greater good. I was serving the Empire. He may be so disenfranchised now that he says, you know what? Screw the Empire. I did everything right. I'm anti-Empire now. I'm joining the rebels. And it may take a series of, like, his mom may need to be, like, imprisoned or, like, something bad may happen.
That's exactly what's going to happen. Or maybe that's exactly the right mindset anyway. I think that he needs one more push to realize that the Empire are jerks.
Yes.
And I think what that push is going to come because he's going to say, hey, look, fine, I'm still ambitious. I know I'm right.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like when an immovable object meets an unstoppable force. He believes he's right to the end of the earth. He's going to do something that's not sanctioned by the Empire.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, the Empire is going to overreact, whether it's imprisoning his mom or even killing his mom or something along that line.
Yep.
And when that happens, that's going to break him and say, hey, maybe the guys I'm working for are actually the jerks.
I agree.
And maybe there's something to what Cassian was saying, which was these guys were bad guys. Mm-hmm. So even though I killed them, I killed bad guys. I didn't kill good guys.
I think that's right. I think that's also such a compelling storyline, right? We love to see that the hardline guy is the one who turns, right? We've seen this, good guy or the bad guy turns good and vice versa.
And under the right moral imperative, not like Hux in episode 8 and 9. I really am enjoying it. I have to admit there are times, though, like episode 7 in particular, where I was like, oh, this is slow, but maybe too slow. Although episode 8 was slow, it had some stuff that was so interesting that I was still very happy to see it.
So I don't like the stuff on Ferrix. I don't know what her name is.
Bix.
Fiona Shaw, right? The lady from Killing Eve. I don't like Ferrix, anything that's happening there. You know, Bix finally, even though Bix is so beautiful, Bix kind of got what's coming to her, you know? She's been trying to always manipulate the situation, right? She kind of was dating a guy, but she still had a thing for Cassian. And then she kind of got them both, screwed. She was trying to negotiate this with Luthen, and then that didn't work out. And now she's trying to manipulate the guy that she works for to use the communication device. And she seems to always be trying to like overreach in the situation. And now that seems to have finally like come down on her. But again, nothing that's taking place on Ferrix, I think, is interesting. I'm not learning anything else. That seems like it's in neutral at the moment. There's clearly something important with Bix. I just don't know what.
Because nobody on Ferrix knows where Cassian Andor is. And we know that.
Yeah.
I don't understand like the purpose of Cinta staying there on a stakeout. I don't see the purpose of Bix trying to do what she's trying to do. I don't get it at this stage.
I think, well, I was with you until you said the statement. Now that you say the statement, if you look at all the people who are there together, right? Mm-hmm. Is it possible that this is kind of the rebel group? That it's going to be Vel and Cinta
Bix,
and Fiona Shaw and Bix and this big guy who just carries his gloves around everywhere? Like, is it possible that these 5 or 6 kind of like band together somehow. If I had to point out like a part of the show that I don't like, nothing on Ferrex is inspiring to me because I feel like this is just old news. No one knows where Andor is. Andor's gone. None of these people seem to be critical to, you know, the rebellion or the Empire going forward. It's just a big witch hunt. The Empire could like expedite this if they want. Now they've got Bix. They'll torture her a little bit. Do you know where Andor is? I have no idea. Has he ever mentioned any planets that he wants to party on? Maybe, maybe not, right? Who's his mom? Who are his friends? Who are his relatives? Like, yes, they're just going to go and scorched earth and torture everybody. It's not going to change. We know Andor can't come back and save them. I'm not getting any of the Ferrex storyline.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, can I just say, we kind of glossed over it. I did like, though, that we don't really, you know, we see Andor spends a month or 30 shifts in jail.
Yeah.
We see that little mini time lapse there. So there's serious consequences to this, right? It's not that he was in jail for one night and then gets broken out in like an episode or two. It's been a month. He's been there for some time.
I kind of like the jail. Well, the first thing I thought he was going to come in and he was going to like re-engineer everything. He was going to say, wait a second, guys, this is so inefficient. You do the wrench and you do the thing and you do the blah, blah, blah. And suddenly he was going to like reinvent that whole assembly line and they were going to be the best performing group. He was going to get promoted. I thought he was like really going to come in and do something. It didn't seem like he did. He's just a member of the crew.
He is, but they've become one of the more top performing ones now. I was hoping for something similar. I was thinking that, he's going to be the guy that takes them to the top of the league every week because he's just like, okay, this is what I'm good at. This is what you're good at. Because remember, he kind of did the same thing when they were planning out the heist where he was very analytical. Yeah. So I was kind of hoping for that as well, but no such luck.
Yeah. In terms of the escape, I mean, again, like I thought that he'd be, maybe we'll see this kind of in the next episode, but I thought like every shift he would be like gleaming one piece of information or one small gadget or something, right? Or testing one thing like, hey, how long can I step on this before it turns red or before it vibrates or before can I stand on my lunch plate, you know, instead? What if I throw my fork on the floor? And I thought he'd be doing like all these like mini testings, you know, to like Shawshank Redemption style, you know? But that hasn't really been the case. I guess it's intended to show kind of the mundanity. But again, these are also the things like they showed kind of like the shower scene. They show how he eats and drinks. They show his, and for me, it was just kind of like interesting because in the canon of Star Wars, we've never really seen anyone eat anything. We've never seen any hygiene, you know? It's space. And it's kind of interesting to see like, hey, they just like have all these nozzles in the air. They spray them down. They've got a tube. They drink out of the tube. They eat out of the tube. They've got a dish. They put the dish against the wall. It probably somehow automatically cleans. And I don't know. I think all those little details to me are like really interesting.
They fill in a lot of blanks, which we didn't really know were there.
Yeah.
And so it adds a lot of color to the universe. This is the advantage that now Disney has with TV programming is that show things that you would never dream of wasting screen time on in a cinema. You can spend a few minutes doing on every episode in TV.
The benefit of television, right?
Yeah. Look, I mean, I don't have much to say about the show's premise or the show, not premise, you know, but the actual plot of these 2 episodes, because again, I strongly suspect that we're going to be talking about Andor in a bigger way next week based on the structure of the last 8, let's say the first 6 episodes. But I will say that for a show I wasn't particularly keen on watching, it's interesting to me how fast this has risen in the ranks. I would go counterintuitively when you compare the number 1 and the number 2. I would go so far as to say this is probably my second favorite Star Wars show after Mandalorian.
Oh.
I didn't like Boba Fett. And I wasn't particularly keen on season 1 of Obi-Wan, although I know that they're doing a season 2. And that, to me, on principle, sounds more interesting because it should be the adventures of Obi-Wan on Tatooine as, he transitions to the older man.
So I will say Andor is far and away my favorite. I liked Mandalorian, but for me, Mandalorian was pointless. It was a standalone show about the Mandalorian, obviously, but it didn't add anything to the Star Wars universe for me. Boba Fett, for me, was worse because...
it took away.
It took away. Because, first of all my respect for that dude who's a very well-known, I think he's New Zealand actor.
Timur something. Yeah.
He's the wrong guy to be cast as Boba Fett 30, 40 years later. Yeah. It just wasn't the right guy to be cast. I was really disappointed with Boba Fett. Boba Fett was the cool... In the Return of the Jedi, I mean, they're not even the same size, by the way. Right? I mean, the guy's 40 years older. Return of the Jedi's 85?
No, but that was a different actor. Tamura came in episode 1. So that would be 99.
Oh, it came in 99?
Because that's where we see Jango Fett.
Yeah, maybe that's right. It was... Anyway, the whole point was I just didn't think that was the right actor for Boba Fett. Especially when we see that he's supposed to be escaping from the... whatever this thing is, right? That he was thrown into.
Sarlacc pit.
The Sarlacc pit at the end of Return of the Jedi, right? He's thrown in as this very kind of skinny Boba Fett, and he comes out this much older, bigger Boba Fett.
Yeah, obviously, but that's just I don't have too much of an issue with that. That's just, the ravages of time, right?
Boba took me away. And Obi-Wan, the same thing. Obi-Wan was just such a gloomy Obi-Wan. It really disappointed me to look at him in this way.
Why I liked The Mandalorian particularly was because it was a show that kind of proved to the world that you can do a Star Wars show or even a movie that's not about the Anakin Skywalker's family.
It was
was a standalone story.
True.
And it was the first, right? It was the one that everyone was like, why are we watching this? And then when you watch it, you're just like, wait a minute. It's got all the coolness of Star Wars. It doesn't have any of the baggage of the Skywalkers.
Yeah.
So you really can tell your own tale and do whatever you want. And of course, it's got touch points, right? You've got the Force. You see a few cameos. You see that. But it's got its own standalone universe. And Andor does something very similar.
But Andor has an endpoint, right? Andor has a greater purpose than Mandalorian. The benefit of Mandalorian is that you have a blank canvas. You can tell any story you want. That's very empowering as a storyteller, right? Andor, you don't. You're limited whether you go left or
5 years.
You're limited where you can go because at the end, you have to end up at this precise point. And that gives you less flexibility, but at the same time, it's a more substantial story. The stakes are higher. You're showing how someone got to that point. That's really power.
This is not too dissimilar to what we're seeing with House of the Dragon and Rings of Power, which is we know how it ends.
Yeah.
House of the Dragon ends with Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
And for this, we know that Andor will end with Rogue One.
Right.
So we know where the characters end up. The difference is that we get to see their path to that end.
You know what flopped? Solo flopped so hard.
Yeah.
And Solo's not unlike any of this, except that it was a movie. And that possibly if Solo would have been a series...
I think it probably would have helped. I think it would have helped a lot, actually, to have it, because you could spend more time with Solo and Lando.
Yeah.
Doing their things together.
And Chewbacca. I mean, that's the greatest of... I mean, has there ever been a I don't know what the word is, a non-human friendship that's been stronger in the history of entertainment?
You're right, because they released Chewbacca 2/3 of the way into the movie, or maybe halfway into the movie, and then you get 45 minutes of Solo and Chewbacca, but you don't really get time to see them build up that chemistry at all.
And they met under such awful circumstances, right?
But that is true. That is the canon way, right? Because even in the games, that's basically why he had the life debt to him, was because he released him and all the Wookiees from that jail.
I guess my point was, I thought that relationship was so important that
it was undercooked, but that was because of time.
Yeah.
It was really because of the time limit. Yeah. And then they had that stupid Darth Maul cameo at the end of it with Emilia Clarke. I just thought that was such a terrible, terrible, stupid thing to do. But
there was too much Emilia Clarke. As much as I love Emilia Clarke, she should be in way more movies now. But that was when she was at the height of Game of Thrones, and it was not appropriate to have her in that movie. The focus
or
should,
certainly in that role.
No.
Because she plays a bad guy, a not great bad guy, and then that too, she plays a bad guy against Han Solo. Who in their right minds is going to root for the person who is against Han Solo?
It's impossible.
It's just the wrong anti-hero to play.
I agree. That whole movie is really disappointing. Okay, so that is Andor episodes 7, 8. Episode 9 coming out in a few days. And there's 10 in this season?
12 in this season.
Oh.
So I suspect something significant is going to happen in episode 9, which is going to cap off this mini episode where he got caught, goes to jail, and then he either breaks out or the rebellion is officially formed. Something like that is going to happen.
I would propose we not review 9, but after 10, we do another breakdown and start to predict where it's going to go for the last 2 of the year.
In any case, the point is, wherever you choose to break it down, I think it's important to recognize that this show is so dense and also so slow moving. And that's not a bad thing, by the way.
They're both, yeah.
That doing a recap on a weekly basis is unnecessary. Because if you think about it on a very practical basis, here's the recap for episode 8. He goes to jail. He learns the system in jail over 30 days. The Empire figures out that there is potentially a rebellion. They blow their chance at a lead. Some of them are looking for Cassian Andor. Some of them are not. And Mon Mothma is struggling to figure out her finances.
Mm-hmm. Banking regulations. Auditors.
They seem irrelevant on an episode-by-episode basis, but I think when you look at the bigger picture, you start to see that, there's definitely, this is why this happened. They explain motivation over the course of the season. They don't explain motivation over the course of the episode.
Oh, yeah.
In which case, doing a weekly review, less exciting.
We'll do it in 2 weeks.
Perfect. Sounds great.
I'm hoping our listeners give us some good topics and find some Easter eggs as well, because there are a lot of Easter eggs in these shows.
Absolutely. So if anyone sees them, why don't you drop us a comment below or send us a tweet at F&S Podcast. Or if you don't want to do any of that, send us an email, aloha@filmsandstuffpodcast.com.
Pete, thank you for your time. Listeners, thank you for your attention. We'll catch you next week. We've got a lot of good stuff, but it will be 2 weeks until we review Andor again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely day ahead.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Films and Stuff. If you haven't already, please subscribe and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are downloaded. Films and Stuff. There is no substitute.